The polished marble floors of Il Padrino reflected the amber glow of wall sconces, but Amelia Hayes only ever saw her own worn-out black, non-slip shoes. The restaurant sat in the heart of Manhattan's financial district, not in some gleaming tower, but in a converted brownstone with thick stone walls and windows that seemed designed to keep secrets in rather than let light out. Amelia, or Mia as her name tag read, was a master of invisibility. It was a skill honed over 2 years of surviving in New York City on her own terms. She was 24, but the city, the demanding clientele, and the constant shadow of her past had etched a weariness into her soft features that made her seem older. She was shy, not in a giggling, blushing way, but in a quiet, observant way that made her a perfect waitress and a terrible target for notice. She anticipated needs before they were spoken. She refilled water glasses like a ghost. She was, in short, the ideal employee for a restaurant that charged $500 for a steak and valued discretion above all else. The kind of place where deals were made in whispers, where men in dark suits discussed things that would never appear in any ledger. Her life was a small, contained loop, a tiny fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, the pre-dawn rattle of the N train, her shift where she existed in a world of obscene wealth, smelling truffle oil and $1,000 wines, and the train ride home, her feet throbbing, with just enough energy to eat a bowl of cereal before collapsing. She did this for a reason, to prove something, to prove that the name Hayes was enough, even if the world only respected the name Romano. Her father, Vincenzo Romano, was not a man who appeared in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. He was something else entirely, a name spoken in certain circles with a particular tone, a mix of respect and fear that no amount of money could buy. The founder of what was publicly known as Romano Interests, a private holding company with fingers in real estate, logistics, restaurants, and a dozen other ventures that all seemed perfectly legitimate on paper. But Vincenzo Romano's real empire wasn't built in boardrooms. It was built in back rooms, in handshake deals that meant more than any contract, in a world where your word was law and breaking it meant disappearing. He was old school, Sicilian to his bones, a man who had started with nothing in Brooklyn and built something that couldn't be measured in stock prices or quarterly earnings. And Amelia, his only daughter, had walked away from it all. She'd left the townhouse on the Upper East Side, the drivers who appeared without being called, the crushing weight of being Vincenzo Romano's daughter, a title that came with protection she never asked for, and expectations she couldn't breathe under. She'd left to prove she wasn't just a Romano. She was herself. Tonight, Il Padrino was buzzing with a particular energy. The air crackled with the kind of tension that only new money arrogance could bring. The reservation was under Marchetti. "Oh, God," whispered Jessica, a fellow waitress, as she checked the reservation book. "It's him." Amelia didn't need to ask. Nico Marchetti was a legend in certain New York circles, a new age titan of finance whose firm, Marchetti Capital, had made headlines for its aggressive takeovers and disruptive tactics. He was self-made, ruthless, and according to restaurant gossip, an absolutely horrendous guest. What most people didn't know was that Nico Marchetti's first 100 million had come from somewhere specific, from someone specific. 15 years ago, a young, hungry analyst with brilliant ideas and no backing had been summoned to a certain townhouse. He'd walked in desperate and walked out a made man. He'd walked out with Vincenzo Romano's backing and Vincenzo's word. "Table 7 is yours, Mia," Sal DeMarco said, smoothing at his silk tie. Sal was the restaurant's manager, a nervous man in his 50s who'd worked for the Romano family in various capacities for decades. His eyes darted toward the door. "Mr. Marchetti is particular. Just be perfect. No mistakes." "Yes, Mr. DeMarco," Amelia murmured, her stomach tightening. Nico Marchetti didn't walk in. He conquered. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom suit that probably cost more than Amelia's yearly rent, flanked by 2 younger men who looked like polished predators. He was on his phone, barking orders. "I don't care if it's 3 in the morning in Tokyo. You get him on the line, or you're finished." He snapped the phone shut, tossed his overcoat at the hostess without looking at her, and strode to his table. The restaurant's usual quiet hum seemed to lower another octave in his wake. Amelia, invisible as ever, glided forward. "Good evening, Mr. Marchetti. Welcome to Il Padrino. Can I? He held up a hand, not even looking at her. Don't talk. Just bring the 98 Lafitte, a Magnum, and tell the chef I want the Wagyu. But if it's even a degree over medium rare, I'm sending it back. Got it? Amelia flinched, but her training kicked in. Yes, sir, right away. The next 2 hours were a master class in humiliation. The dinner was a nightmare. Marchetti was performing for his junior partners, a grotesque theater of power. He sent the first Magnum back, claiming it was corked. It wasn't. He complained that the ambient temperature was wrong. He berated Amelia for reaching across the table, a cardinal sin, when one of his guests dropped a fork. Through it all, Amelia was the perfect invisible servant. Yes, sir. My apologies, sir. Right away, sir. Her hands trembled slightly as she cleared the dessert plates. They were finally done. Marchetti was leaning back, swirling a glass of what was probably 100-year-old cognac, bragging about a recent hostile takeover. So I told the board, you can either accept my offer or you can watch me burn your company to the ground from the outside. They signed by morning. His guests laughed, a forced, sycophantic sound. Marchetti glanced at his wrist, and his entire demeanor changed. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. His face, moments ago flushed with arrogance, turned pale, then a dangerous blotchy red. My watch, he whispered, his voice a low growl. His guests stopped laughing. My watch, he roared, standing up so fast his chair screeched backward. It's got—" The entire restaurant, a room of New York's elite, went silent. He patted his pockets, his waistcoat, his pants. My Patek, my Calatrava, it's gone. Sal DeMarco was at the table in seconds, wringing his hands. Mr. Marchetti, please. Perhaps it fell. It didn't fall, Marchetti snarled, his eyes scanning the room like a predator. He looked at the busboy. He looked at his guests. And then his eyes landed on Amelia, who was standing frozen by the service station, holding a silver tray with the credit card slip. His gaze narrowed. You. Amelia's blood turned to ice. Sir? He strode toward her. She was 5'4". He was well over 6 feet. He loomed. You. You were the only one who got close to me when you were clearing the plates. Sir, I don't know what you're talking about, Amelia stammered, backing up. My watch, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying hiss. A Patek Philippe 511G, $200,000. Where is it? I didn't. You, he spat, jabbing a finger in her face. You've been hovering all night, all meek and quiet. It's always the quiet ones, the little rats. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think you could palm a $200,000 watch? Mr. DeMarco, Amelia pleaded, turning to her boss. Sal looked at Marchetti, then at Amelia. He saw a terrified, replaceable waitress in a man whose goodwill could make or break his restaurant. He made his choice. Miss Hayes, Sal said, his voice cold. Just cooperate. Empty your pockets. Show Mr. Marchetti you have nothing. Amelia's face burned with humiliation. The entire restaurant was watching. Phones were discreetly being raised. I know, she whispered. It was one thing to be accused. It was another to be treated like a common criminal. I am not a thief. I will not be searched. You see, Marchetti roared. She's refusing. She has it, you little thief. And then he did it. It wasn't a closed fist punch. It was a slap. An open-palmed, degrading, vicious slap that cracked across the silent restaurant like a gunshot. Amelia's head snapped to the side. The force sent her stumbling back, her tray and the credit card machine clattering to the marble floor. A stunned, horrified gasp rippled through the room. Time stopped. Amelia slowly brought a trembling hand to her cheek. It was burning, stinging. But worse than the physical pain was the absolute, crushing public humiliation. Tears welled, hot and instant, blurring the faces of the diners staring at her. You hit me, she whispered. Her voice choked. I'll do more than that, Marchetti yelled, high on adrenaline and rage. You're a common thief. I'm going to have you arrested. I'm going to have you thrown in prison. DeMarco, call the police. Tell them your waitress just stole a $250,000 watch. Yes, Mr. Marchetti. Sal fumbled for his phone. Right away. Amelia was trapped. The entire restaurant had turned against her. They saw a powerful man and a guilty-looking waitress. Her word meant nothing against his. She was going to be arrested. Her name, her carefully built independent Hayes name, was going to be dragged through the mud. She would be fired, blacklisted, all her hard work, all her sacrifice destroyed by one arrogant, violent man. The tears streamed down her face. She was small, she was invisible, and she was utterly, completely alone. Or was she? She looked at Marchetti, who was sneering at her, triumphant. She looked at Al, who was nervously dialing. She looked at the diners who were already turning back to their meals. The show over, no. The thought was a tiny ember in the cold terror. No, he doesn't get to win. Not like this. She straightened her back. Her hand was still on her face, but her eyes were clear. She wiped the tears from her other cheek with the back of her hand. Wait, she said, her voice shaking but loud enough to stop Sal's dialing. Marchetti scoffed. What? Going to confess? Give it back now and I'll only have you fired. Amelia took a shaky breath. I'm supposed to get one phone call, right? The sheer audacity of the statement hung in the air. Nico Marchetti actually laughed. It was a short, barking sound. One phone call? This isn't a movie, you stupid girl. You're not a gangster. You're a waitress who got caught. The police will be here in 5 minutes and they'll take you downtown. Your one call will be from a holding cell. Please, Amelia said, looking at Sal. Her voice was still trembling, but the hysteria was gone, replaced by something hard. Before you call the police, let me make one call. That's all I ask. Sal hesitated. The situation was already a nightmare. A crying, red-cheeked waitress was a bad look. Mr. Marchetti, he ventured. Perhaps 5 minutes? Marchetti waved a hand dismissively. Fine, whatever. Let her call her boyfriend or her loser parents. Let her say goodbye to her pathetic life. It doesn't matter. He folded his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. The power, the control, the righteous anger. You have 2 minutes. Amelia nodded, her eyes downcast. She reached not for a sleek smartphone, but for the pocket of her apron, from which she pulled a small, slightly battered iPhone. It was another mark of her supposed station. Cheap, disposable, like her. Her fingers shaking, she unlocked the screen. The restaurant was deathly quiet. The only sound was the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the faint tapping of her thumb on the glass. She went to her contacts. She scrolled past Jessica, past landlord, past the few names she'd allowed into her new life. She scrolled all the way to the bottom, to a single entry, a name she hadn't called in over 6 months. Dad. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear, her other hand still protectively cradling her stinging cheek. Who's she calling? A woman at a nearby table whispered. Probably her public defender. Her date snickered. Amelia closed her eyes, tuning them out. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, he picked up. His voice wasn't warm. It was never warm. It was precise, clean, clipped. A voice that didn't waste words. Amelia. He never said hello. Just the name. A statement of fact. Dad, she whispered. And to her shame, her voice broke. The slap, the accusation, it all came crashing down. Amelia. The iciness in his voice cracked just a fraction, replaced by immediate, sharp concern. He knew her. She never cried. What's wrong? I'm at work, she choked out. I'm at Il Padrino. Yes, she could hear the sound of a keyboard stopping. I'm aware. Of course he was. He always knew where she was. That was part of their strained arrangement. A customer, she continued, her voice dropping lower. He lost his watch. He's accusing me of stealing it. Did you? The question was flat. Not an accusation, just a request for data. No, Dad, no, I would never. I know, continue. He hit me. Silence. Complete, total, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. Amelia could picture him, sitting in his study in the townhouse overlooking the park. His hand would be frozen. His eyes would have gone from cold to absolute zero. He what? The voice was no longer human. It was the sound of a glacier moving. He slapped me in front of everyone. He called me a thief. His name is Nico Marchetti. He's here. He's having the manager call the police right now." Another beat of silence. Nico Marchetti. Her father repeated the name like he was tasting something rotten. Marchetti Capital. "Yes," Amelia whispered. He's laughing at me. He told me to call my loser parents." Nico Marchetti, hearing the murmur of her conversation, was getting impatient. "Time's up, sweetheart. Police are on their way. You want to tell Daddy you're going to jail?" Amelia looked at him, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her father's voice came through now, sharp and commanding. "Amelia, listen to me. Look at him." She did. "What is your name, Amelia?" "What? What is the name on your birth certificate?" She swallowed. She hadn't said the name out loud in 2 years. Amelia Claire Romano." "Good." There was a pause. "Now put your phone on speaker and hand it to him." "What? No, Dad, I can't." "Do it now, but..." His voice was not loud, but it carried absolute authority. "And then I want you to step back and not say another word." Her hand was shaking so violently, she almost dropped the phone. This was it. The end of her experiment. The end of Mia Hayes. She looked at Nico Marchetti's smug, arrogant face. She pressed the speaker button. Then she held the phone out to him. "What's this?" Marchetti sneered. "Your daddy wants to beg for you? Not going to happen." He wants to talk to you," Amelia whispered. With a dramatic roll of his eyes, Marchetti snatched the phone from her hand. He held it to his face like it was a piece of trash. "Yeah, this is Nico Marchetti. Who the hell is this? I hope you've got a good lawyer, Daddy, because your daughter is a..." A voice, amplified by the small speaker, cut through the restaurant. It was not loud. It was not shouting. But it had a weight that silenced every other sound. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, unquestioning obedience. 5 seconds, apologize." Marchetti froze. The smirk faltered. There was something familiar about that voice, something that made his blood run cold. What? Who is this?" His own voice was losing its bluster. "You are at Il Padrino, table 7. You just accused my daughter of stealing. And you struck her." The voice was listing facts. It was cold. Colder than anything Marchetti had ever heard. "How do you know that?" Marchetti stammered. "Vincenzo Romano." The name hung in the air. Vincenzo Romano. To the other diners, the name meant little. It wasn't a celebrity name. It wasn't splashed across headlines. It was a name whispered in certain rooms, not shouted in public. But to Nico Marchetti, it was the sound of his own execution. His face, Amelia would remember it for the rest of her life. It wasn't a slow realization. It was an instant, catastrophic system failure. The blood drained from his face so fast he turned a waxy, pale gray. His eyes, which had been narrowed in arrogant rage, widened in sheer, abject terror. The hand holding the phone began to shake. His knees literally buckled, and he gripped the back of a chair to keep himself from collapsing. He had not connected Mia Hayes, the shy, mousy waitress, to Amelia Romano, the almost mythical, reclusive daughter of the most feared man in New York. "Vincenzo," Marchetti stuttered into the phone, his voice high and panicked. "Mr. Romano, sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." The voice on the phone was relentless. "No misunderstanding, Nico. You struck my daughter. You called her a thief." I didn't know," Marchetti yelped, a pathetic, high-pitched sound. She never said. I thought, sir, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was your, that, the voice cut in, sharp as a razor, "is the problem. You thought she was nobody. You thought she was disposable. You thought you could assault a woman serving you and there would be no consequences." Sal DeMarco, who had been watching this exchange, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He knew the name Romano. Romano interests owned half the buildings in this neighborhood, including, he suddenly remembered with horror, this one. Marchetti was now sweating, not just a bead of perspiration. He was drenched. His expensive suit was clinging to him. "Sir, please," he begged, holding the phone with both hands as if it were a holy relic. Let me make this right. It was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake." He turned to Amelia, his smile a grotesque rictus of terror. Amelia, I'm so sorry. I was upset. The watch, it's just a thing. The voice on the phone spoke again. Stay exactly where you are, Nico. Don't move. A pause. Give the phone back to my daughter. Marchetti, moving like a terrified automaton, slowly extended the phone to Amelia. His hand was shaking so badly she could barely take it. She lifted it to her ear, clicking off the speaker. Dad, she whispered. Are you all right, Amelia? His voice was different now. The glacial anger was still there, but underneath was a deep, rumbling concern. I, I think so, she said. Good. I'm on my way. 10 minutes. Dad, no, you don't have to. 10 minutes, he repeated. And Amelia, Franco is walking through the door right now. Go to him. As if summoned by the words, the heavy wooden doors of Il Padrino swung open. But it wasn't a police officer. It was a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone. He was in his 60s, with a powerful, quiet build, a dark suit that probably cost more than most cars, and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. His eyes found Amelia instantly. Franco had been with Vincenzo Romano for 40 years. He'd been there at the beginning, when Vincenzo was just another kid from Brooklyn with nothing but ambition and a code. He'd been consigliere, enforcer, protector, and friend. He was family. He walked past the hostess stand, past the stunned diners. He walked directly to Amelia. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, he stepped between her and Nico Marchetti, facing the man. He didn't say a word. He just stood, a silent, immovable wall. Marchetti looked at Franco, a man whose face he'd seen in photos, always 2 steps behind Vincenzo Romano, and he finally truly understood. He was done. Oh God, Marchetti whispered, slumping into his chair. Oh my God. The 2 junior partners at his table had their phones out, not filming, but frantically texting, probably to their lawyers. They had just witnessed their boss's career implode. The entire restaurant was frozen in a tableau of social horror. The silence was absolute. Everyone was watching, waiting. 10 minutes for Nico Marchetti's entire life to tick away. To understand the depth of Nico Marchetti's terror, you have to understand who Vincenzo Romano was. Vincenzo Romano was not new money. He wasn't a tech entrepreneur who'd gotten lucky. He was something else entirely. His family's roots went back to Sicily, to a time when your word was your bond and your honor was your life. His grandfather had come to Brooklyn with nothing. His father had built a small import business, olive oil, wine, legitimate goods that served as the foundation for something larger. Vincenzo had taken that foundation and built an empire, but not the kind that appeared in business magazines. Romano Interest was a private entity. It had no shareholders to answer to. It answered only to Vincenzo. He was known in certain circles as simply Don Vincenzo, a title that carried weight far beyond any corporate designation. He didn't just invest. He anointed. He would find brilliant, ambitious, utterly ruthless young talents, like Nico Marchetti, and he would give them their first real chance. But his backing came with a price. It was never written down. It was a verbal agreement, a handshake in his study. Nico Marchetti remembered that day 15 years ago. He'd been a hungry, brilliant analyst with a revolutionary algorithm. No one would fund him. He was too aggressive, too much of a risk. Romano had summoned him. He'd listened to Nico's pitch for 10 minutes, his face unreadable. Then he'd stood and walked to the window. You're a predator, Nico, Romano had said, his back to him. I respect that. Predators are useful, but they need discipline. Sir, my projections are solid. Your projections don't matter. Romano turned. I'll give you your 100 million. I'll open doors. I'll make you rich before you're 40. And you will be. You have the hunger. Nico had been breathless. What do you want in return? 20%. Blind trust. Romano's pale blue eyes had been ice. And one other thing, my word. Your word. You'll be a wolf, but you'll be my wolf. You'll conduct yourself with dignity. You won't bring scandal. You won't let your appetites make you sloppy. You won't embarrass me. You're a reflection of my judgment, and my judgment is perfect. Romano had smiled, thin, cold, terrifying. Break my word, Nico, and I take back everything I gave you. Everything. Do we have an agreement? Nico, young and desperate, had agreed instantly. For 15 years, he'd followed the rules. He'd built his empire, always knowing Romano was in the shadows. But as Marchetti Capital grew, as it hit 50 billion, then 100 billion in assets, Nico had grown complacent. He'd become arrogant. He thought he was his own man. He thought the old man had lost his edge. He'd even made a move against Romano's son, William, a secret proxy war in a tech acquisition that had cost the Romano family nearly $1 billion. It was clean, untraceable. Nico thought he'd gotten away with it, right? He thought he had finally outsmarted his mentor. He had forgotten the most important rule. Vincenzo Romano never forgets, and he never forgives. Romano had been waiting. He knew about the betrayal. He was just waiting for the right moment to make an example, a public one. And tonight, Nico Marchetti hadn't just broken the word. He hadn't just brought scandal. He had put hands on Vincenzo Romano's blood, on his daughter, the one person in the world Vincenzo would burn the city down for. Nico hadn't just poked the lion. He had walked into the lion's den and struck his cub. This was the knowledge flooding Nico Marchetti's brain as he sat shaking at table 7, guarded by Franco. He wasn't just going to lose his company. He wasn't just going to be ruined. He was going to be erased. The 10 minutes that followed were not just a pause. They were a suffocation. The silence in Il Padrino was no longer the polite hush of fine dining. It was the dense, feral quiet of a room that knew it was bearing witness to something terrible. No one left. No one dared. The clinking of a fork on a plate halfway across the room sounded like a gunshot, and the diner who dropped it froze, horrified. Amelia stood behind Franco's granite-like form. He was her shield, and his presence, so silent and absolute, was the only thing keeping her knees from buckling. The adrenaline was ebbing, leaving behind a nauseating, shaky cold. Her cheek was no longer just stinging. It was a dull, hot throb. Sal DeMarco stood by the hostess stand, visibly trembling, the color of old parchment. He was watching his life's work circle the drain. And then there was Nico Marchetti. He sat at his table, a table he'd commanded just minutes ago, a prisoner in his $8,000 suit. He was cycling through stages of grief, stuck in a violent loop between denial and terror. This can't be happening. Romano. Her. No, it's a bluff. But his gut knew the truth. He could feel the crosshairs. The 10 minutes expired. The heavy wooden doors of Il Padrino opened with a near-silent push. The man who entered was the physical opposite of Nico Marchetti. He was not a giant. He was not broad. He was slender, in his late 60s, and wore no power suit. He was dressed in a simple dark gray cashmere sweater, dark trousers, and unassuming leather shoes. He wore no watch. He looked more like a retired professor than a man who could move mountains with a phone call. But the moment he stepped inside, the entire gravitational pull of the room shifted. The air became impossible to breathe. This was not the entry of a man. It was the arrival of a force. He was followed by a younger man who detached and took up position by the door, a silent echo of Franco. Vincenzo Romano did not scan the room. He did not look for his prey. His eyes found Amelia instantly. He ignored Nico Marchetti, who had half risen from his chair, a strangled "sir" dying in his throat. He ignored Sal DeMarco, who was attempting to walk forward, wringing his hands. Vincenzo Romano walked past them all as if they were nothing more than elaborate, distasteful pieces of furniture. He stopped directly in front of his daughter. He and Franco exchanged a look so fleeting it was subvocal. Franco took a single step back, giving space. Vincenzo looked at Amelia. He didn't speak. He simply, with a gentleness that was in stark, terrifying contrast to the violence that had preceded it, reached out. His fingers, surprisingly warm, tilted her chin up, turning her face toward the light. His face was calm. His jaw was not clenched. His breathing was not heavy. But his eyes, his pale, icy blue eyes, were burning with a cold, precise, nuclear fury that was far more terrifying than any rage. He examined the bright red handprint on her cheek. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. "Dad," Amelia whispered, and her resolve finally utterly broke. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over. Dad, I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. I had to call you. I didn't know what to do. Vincenzo's expression didn't change, but his thumb gently brushed a tear from her cheek. You did exactly what you had to do, he said, his voice a low, rumbling promise that only she could hear. You endured this. This is not your fault, Amelia. This is not on you. He let his hand drop. He will not touch you again. And then he turned. The performance, the arrogance, the rage, the terror was over. The execution began. He finally, for the first time, acknowledged Nico Marchetti. Nico, he said. His voice was casual, as if greeting an old acquaintance at a social gathering. Marchetti flinched as if struck. He stood fully, his body trembling. Vincenzo, Mr. Romano, sir, I can explain. Please, you have to let me. No, Vincenzo said, his voice still quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. You can't. There is no explanation. But you will listen. He took a single step closer. Franco melted back into the shadows. 15 years ago, Nico, Vincenzo began, I found you. You were brilliant, hungry. No one would fund you. They said you were too aggressive, too arrogant, too much of a risk. I saw that as an asset. He paced one step. I gave you the world. I opened every door. I made you a billionaire. And I asked for one thing in return, a simple agreement. We called it my word. Do you remember my word, Nico? Marchetti was pale, sweating. I do. You remember it? Yes, Marchetti whispered. Yes. No, no scandal, no shame. Not to embarrass me, Bay, Vincenzo corrected, his voice lethally soft. Not to bring shame to my judgment. And what did you do? He gestured to Amelia. You, a man I made, put your hands on my daughter. You, in a restaurant in my building, assaulted a woman because you thought you were untouchable. You thought you were a king. He scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. You did this over a watch. It was lost, Marchetti pleaded, his voice cracking. It was stolen. I thought she took it. The Patek, it was worth. Oh, the watch, Vincenzo said as if just remembering a trivial detail. He turned his head, not taking his eyes off Marchetti. Franco. Franco stepped forward. He walked with calm, methodical precision directly to table 7. He walked past Nico Marchetti to the chair the man had so violently jumped from. He didn't search, he didn't fumble. He simply reached down between the cushion and the dark wood frame. His hand emerged. In it, glittering under the amber lights, was a large platinum Patek Philippe Calatrava. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the room. It was the sound of the final perfect humiliation. It appears, Franco said, his voice a flat, deadpan monotone, to have slipped off your wrist, Mr. Marchetti. It was wedged in the seat cushion. He placed the $200,000 watch on the table with a soft, definitive click. Marchetti stared at the watch. A small, strangled sound escaped his throat. The sound of a man who knew he was dead. The watch had been there the entire time. Under him, his rage, his violence, it was all based on his own sloppy, arrogant mistake. Vincenzo watched him, his face a mask of cold disappointment. You're sloppy, Nico. You were always sloppy. You let your ego do your thinking. He took a step closer. You thought I was an old man, didn't you? Asleep. Marchetti, mute with terror, could only stare. You thought I didn't know about the proxy war. Vincenzo's voice dropped to a near whisper. If Marchetti had been pale before, he was now translucent. A fresh wave of terror washed over him. He knew. He knew about William. You thought you could betray my son, Vincenzo hissed, the calm finally cracking, revealing white-hot magma beneath. You thought you could finance a move against William, cost my family $1 billion, and I wouldn't notice, that I would just let it go. This was it, the restaurant, the slap. This was just the public pretext. The true sentencing was for a much deeper crime. This, Vincenzo said, gesturing to Amelia's red cheek, was just you being you, arrogant, violent, stupid. But the betrayal, that was your unforgivable sin. This, he pointed at her face again, is just the excuse I needed to do what I should have done a year ago. He turned, his gaze fell on Sal DeMarco. The manager visibly crumpled. You, Vincenzo said. Vincenzo, Mr. Romano, please. I didn't. You did nothing, Vincenzo snapped. You saw a woman being assaulted, and you sided with him because you thought he had more power. You were about to call the police to have her arrested. He looked around the opulent room. As of this moment, Il Padrino is closed. My firm owns this building. Your lease is terminated. Effective immediately. Be gone by morning. No, please, my life, Sal begged, falling to his knees. Vincenzo turned away from him as if he had ceased to exist. He turned back to Marchetti. The final judgment. As for you, Nico, don't bother going to your office tomorrow. Your board is holding an emergency meeting at 6. I've already spoken to them. They're accepting your resignation. Effective immediately. No, Marchetti whispered. The board, they work for me. They worked for you, Vincenzo corrected. They work for the company, a company I own 20% of, a company whose primary investors I spoke with on the way here. Your partners, the two who sat here and watched you do this, will find their access cards no longer work. Marchetti Capital will be dismantled and sold for parts by end of quarter. No, Marchetti was crying now, silent tears. My company, it's my life. It was my company, Vincenzo corrected, his voice devoid of all emotion. I just let you run it. Your life, Nico, is whatever you can salvage from the wreckage. He paused. My advice? Sell everything. You might be able to afford a small, quiet life somewhere very far away. You can't, Marchetti whispered. Vincenzo smiled, the thin, cold, terrifying smile that people had nightmares about. I can. I have. You're a dog that bit the wrong hand, Nico, and you have to be put down. He put a gentle hand on his daughter's back. Come, Amelia. Let's go. He guided her through the silent, stunned restaurant. As they passed table 7, Amelia paused. She looked at Nico Marchetti. He was no longer a titan. He was no longer a billionaire. He was no longer the roaring, terrifying monster who had struck her. He was just a man. A broken, gray, terrified man weeping into his hands, staring at a $200,000 watch that had just cost him his entire world. She didn't say anything. She didn't feel pity. She didn't feel triumph. She just felt clarity. And then she and her father walked out into the cool New York night, leaving the ruins and the deafening silence of a tomb behind them. The fallout was not a storm. A storm is chaotic, natural, indiscriminate. This was a demolition. It was clinical, precise, and every single brick was accounted for. By 6 o'clock the next morning, as the first gray light of dawn broke over the East River, the emergency board meeting of Marchetti Capital was called to order. It lasted exactly 7 minutes. It was not a discussion. It was a reading of a death certificate. As Vincenzo had promised, the motion was presented. There was no mention of a restaurant. There was no mention of a waitress. Instead, they presented a succinct, devastating file compiled by Romano's private accountants, detailing significant financial irregularities and fiduciary breaches tied to the proxy war. The slap, the gross personal misconduct, was merely the public justification. The betrayal of William Romano was the legal and financial execution. By 6:08, the vote was unanimous. Nico Marchetti was removed for cause. His golden parachute was voided. By 6:15, the Wall Street Journal breaking news alert hit every phone. Nico Marchetti forced out at Marchetti Capital. Board cites gross misconduct in breach of fiduciary duty. By 9, the staff of Il Padrino arrived for their prep shifts. They were not met by Sal DeMarco. They were met by a thick industrial chain and padlock on the doors and a single printed notice. Closed permanently. Sal himself was unreachable. His accounts, all held at institutions connected to Romano interests, had been frozen. He had been in a single night unmade. The collateral damage was just as precise. The two junior partners who had sat at table 7 learned their fate via their smartphones. Access denied, emails deactivated, digital beheading. By noon, they were ghosts. Not just fired, excommunicated from Wall Street. The diners who had filmed the incident found their own form of containment. They didn't receive threats. They received polite, formal, utterly chilling emails from the legal counsel of Romano interests. The letters politely reminded them that Miss Amelia Romano was a private citizen, that recording was made without consent, and that any attempt to disseminate footage would be met with the full, swift, and unimaginably well-funded legal resources of the Romano family. Not a single video was ever posted. The complete erasure of Nico Marchetti was a masterpiece. His wife, a shrewd woman who'd been prepared for this kind of implosion, received an anonymous call at 7 in the morning from a lawyer she didn't know. Mr. Romano's legal team suggests you file now. They will be cooperative. She filed by 11:30. An emergency court order froze every asset Marchetti held. Nico himself, locked out of his company, his accounts, his home, lasted 48 hours trying to call in favors. He discovered that the men who had taken his calls for 15 years suddenly no longer had phones. His name was toxic. The liquidation of Marchetti Capital was a feeding frenzy. The viable assets were carved up. But the investors Vincenzo had called weren't just shareholders. They were other men who understood the code. Vincenzo hadn't just asked them to pull out. He'd called in the marker. He'd reminded them what loyalty meant. Nico hadn't just betrayed Vincenzo, he'd betrayed the system. And the system was purging the virus. 2 weeks later, the New York Post ran a small, blurry photo. Spotted. Which disgraced self-made billionaire was seen flying commercial and coach to Dubai? Looks like the high flyer has been permanently grounded. He was gone. Amelia Hayes, the shy waitress, did not go back to her fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria. She never saw her worn-out black shoes again. That night, she sat with her father in his townhouse study, a soft cashmere blanket draped over her shoulders. They watched the sun rise over the park, the sky turning from inky black to bruised purple, then to brilliant, sharp gold. For hours, she just talked, and he just listened. She told him about the 2 years, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the small, quiet pride of paying her own rent, the constant, crushing fear of being a nobody. I was so stupid, she finally whispered, staring into the tea he'd made for her. I was so desperate to prove I wasn't just Amelia Romano. But in the end, that's the only name that saved me. I failed. Vincenzo set his own cup down. He looked at his daughter, his eyes losing their icy control for the first time, showing deep paternal exhaustion. You have it backward, Amelia, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. You didn't fail. You endured. 2 years. You lived on your own terms. You survived this city with no name, no money, no help. I did not believe you could. I was proud of you for it. Stubborn, foolish, but very, very proud. He leaned forward. But you're right about the name. You were treating Hayes like a shield, armor to hide behind. And armor can be breached. It's passive. It's for defense, Mum. He steepled his fingers. The name Romano is not a shield. It's a sword. It's not meant for defense. It's something you wield. You don't use it to protect yourself. You use it to project yourself, to build, or to destroy. He held her gaze. What you saw last night, Amelia. That is what the name is for protecting what's ours, for maintaining order, for ending threats. Nico Marchetti was a threat, a cancer I created that metastasized. The proxy war, she said, remembering the terrifying words from the restaurant. He betrayed William. He betrayed me, Vincenzo said, his voice flat. He was sloppy, arrogant. He forgot my word. What he did to you, his violence, his rage, that was just the final public symptom of his disease. You just happened to find the tumor. Amelia was quiet for a long time. She looked at her own hands, no longer trembling. Then she looked at her father. I'm tired of hiding, she said, her voice small but clear. I'm tired of being invisible. She met his eyes. I think I'm ready to learn how to use it. The sword. A rare, thin, dangerous smile touched Vincenzo Romano's lips. Good, he said, because I have an idea for your first lesson. Amelia Hayes, the shy waitress, died that morning at sunrise. 2 weeks later, the financial world was hit with a second, even more surprising announcement. Romano Interests, the quiet powerhouse, was launching a new aggressive $5 billion venture fund. Its name, the Aegis Fund. It wasn't a soft initiative, it was a disruption fund. Its stated purpose was to invest in overlooked and underestimated founders. But its unwritten, whispered purpose was to identify and fund companies that would directly compete with and destroy businesses run by the Nico Marchetti types of the world. It was not charity. It was an economic weapon aimed at the heart of the old boys club. And its managing director and president? The press release photo was a declaration of war. It showed a woman the world had never seen. She was not the red-cheeked, terrified girl in the restaurant. Her soft brown hair was not in a simple bun. It was pulled back in a severe, sleek, powerful style. She was wearing a stunning, dark blue structured suit. She was not smiling. Her eyes, her father's icy blue, but with a fire all their own, stared directly into the camera. She was not invisible. The headline was simple. Romano Interests appoints Amelia Romano to head new 5 billion venture fund. Wall Street stared at the photo. They read the story. They connected the dots. And they all understood. The slap wasn't a scandal. It was the origin story of a queen. And she was finally home.